What's up, peeps? Today I'll be talking about The Diary of a Country Priest, written by George Bernanos in 1936. The novel explores the life of a young priest who is sent off to his first church at a rural town in northern France called Ambercourt. The book is written in diary form from his perspective, and he records his feelings, experiences, and struggles that he faces in his day-to-day life as a new priest. Due to the personal nature of the diary, the book contains a large amount of introspection and offers an intimate close-up of his life. The priest battles with self-doubt, faith, entanglements with the locals, other priests, and his own physical disease. I think the most salient aspects of this novel are the poignant and honest musings related by the priest. His writings, his writing is filled with brilliant quips and relatable ideas. Although he is never named, he increasingly transforms from a stranger to something like that of a friend by the end of the novel. He's far from perfect due to his delicate demeanor and his insistence on trying to get through to the townsfolk. However, these faults, if you wish to call them that, actually end up being his vehicle to salvation. It'd be difficult to doubt It would be difficult to doubt this priest's sainthood by the end of the novel, since he never errs in moral duties, and rather actually performs heroic acts of faith, hope, and charity. Although the priest is hard on himself for lacking courage and spiritual fervor, the novel's takeaway seems to be of this nature, that seemingly mundane and everyday experiences can be spiritually transformative for the good of both the individual and those around him. Most of the novel is presented through intimate conversations between the priest and other characters. Bernanos shows his excellence in writing during these exchanges, offering dramatic dialogue that is often as gripping as it is sanctifying. The voices of a lot of the characters are so pronounced and lively as to doubt that they were even fictional characters at all. Honestly, the novel reads like a good play sometimes due to its dialogue-heavy narrative. Something special about the priest is that the priest has a special trait that sometimes distances himself from the townsfolk. He doesn't let people go off so easily and tries hard to get to the core of their problems. He's incredibly self-aware of his emotions and of those around him. This sincerity causes people to open up to him when they talk with him. A lot of the townsfolk have a lot of anger or sadness in their lives, but they have no outlet in which to express themselves with, and it's the priest's job to save them by extinguishing their pride and softening their hardened hearts, leading them to God. To think of all these issues felt by random folks in a rural town makes you wonder about the hidden miseries of the world. There's so much behind closed doors that we don't see, and this book really highlights that. The best scene in the book, I think, is the exchange between the Countess and the priest. The Countess is a well-off old woman who has lost her faith. Her husband is having an affair with a housemaid, and her own daughter hates her. To make matters worse, she's been devastated by the death of her young boy. She has grown indignant towards the world, and especially towards God. Ultimately, the priest is able to pierce her soul with his soft reproaches and gentle goading, and he obtains her reconversion to the faith. He is able to let go of her child's death and feels reconciled with God. Her unwillingness to submit to God's will was hampering her spiritual progress and causing severe mental anguish, which bled to her family life. He who so badly wished to see her child one day has accepted the terms on which this occasion would occur. The Countess thanks the priest tremendously, and he absolves her. The priest leaves and feels at peace knowing that he was possibly an instrument in her conversion. Unfortunately, that night she dies, and if it weren't for the priest, she would have been eternally separated from her child and from God. The scene with Monsieur Oliver is another high point of the story. Oliver is a French foreign legionnaire and a relative of the Countess, who visits Ambercourt on his motorbike. He offers the priest a ride, and a beautiful scene ensues. Bernanos' great writing depicts the beauty of youth in one of the few, if not only, moments that the priest is truly happy. Before the ride, the priest was grieving over his lonely and sheltered life. He entered the seminary at age 12 and has had no other experiences. The joyride with Oliver gave him a taste of that world that he missed out on, and he comes to the realization that even if he died that day, he would actually be blessed that God kept him at such a young age, at the peak of his youth. Another star of the novel is the Curé de Torcy. He's a tough priest who offers the polar opposite personality of what the main character is. He's passionate and hot-blooded, and I think he represents the fading personality of a lot of churchmen in the 19th and 20th century, although he is not portrayed in a negative fashion. For example, there's a story that he would tell of a nun who went above and beyond to keep a parish clean. The curé reprimands her because he thinks a church is supposed to be dirty, as a Christian society is supposed to be dirty. He says, "A whole Christian society is a lot dirtier. You wait for the judgment day and see what the angels will be sweeping out of even the most saintly monasteries. Some filth." I think this talks about how just because you're religious doesn't mean you'll automatically be saved. There are countless of corrupt priests and evil churchgoers. Curray also denigrates the type of priest that the main character is, and he thinks that the style of priests that the Vatican is pumping out are no good. He's also disenchanted with the modern world. This theme of the pitfalls of modernization echoes throughout the novel. Contemporary society is so quick to jump from one thing to another. It used to be that a child would be happy with a doll for 6 months, and nowadays grown men get bored of expensive gadgets within 5 minutes. Some men even numb their conscience with drugs or alcohol. And this sounds similar to the problems of today, and goes to show that even a century ago, society was facing the same issues. The Creator Torsi also says people need moments of silence to listen to the voice of Christ, as Christ himself would often retreat into quiet places to pray and meditate. The Curé warns those who will otherwise never hear Jesus until it's too late, and on their death are being welcomed into hell by Satan. Another major theme in the Diary of a Country Priest is the superiority of poverty. The Curé Torsi stresses the act of Christ incarnating into poverty, rather than that of wealth or nobility. In this act, Christ has exalted the poor and elevated their status. Something revolutionary was done here. The poor who have been ever subjected to gross injustices have now been given priority in heaven. The last shall be first, says Christ. Recall the Sermon on the Mount and the often spoken dangers of riches in the Gospels, and you'll get a gist of what the Curé is stressing. He thinks this idea is lost in the church of the 20th century. Ironically, many of the irreligious characters in the book will also attest to this idea, and they will use the church's failure to accommodate to the poor as ammunition against her and support for their own apostasy. Another major component of the novel is how the priest deals with his acedia, or weakness of faith. He ceases to pray and finds it hard to enter into himself, which causes spiritual anguish. However, the diary provides a way for him to pray. A famous line said by the priest is, "The wish to pray is a prayer in itself. God can ask no more than that of us." The novel speaks to all of us who have at times felt that the world or God was against us. The priest recognizes the need to suffer, but judges himself rather harshly and can't bring himself to accept his own words. He dares not compare himself to saints due to the smallness of his problems. He thinks his problems are too mundane to provide spiritual fruits. Of course, by the end, we realize that these are the types of trials that certain people are given to by God. Not everyone has crazy tribulations. For example, the poor experience heavy crosses throughout their lives, yet they die anonymously. It is their perennial story. Yet God in his divine providence knew from all eternity that it would be by these trials that they would gain entrance into heaven. One of the problems is that people don't realize the significance of the crosses that they bear. People are prone to frailty and grumble at the smallest infraction in their lives. The wound of Adam is felt deeply in all of us. The priest does a heartfelt job at conveying man's weakness and his poor state of mind. On the bright side, this is where we find the need for humility and patience, the realization that the weight of the cross will be our redemption. From the beginning of the novel, the priest has been open about a stomach issue that he's been having. This causes him to have a delicate digestion and a thin body. He can only take in bread and wine, which is of course symbolic to the body and blood of Jesus Christ. Throughout the novel, it gets worse and worse. One day, when he's performing his priestly duties around town, he faints on the road, and Seraphita, a young student of his, finds him and helps him out. Many of the trials that the priest bears resemble the Passion of the Christ. And Seraphita, for example, could be an example of Simon or Veronica, who both helped Jesus Christ when he was carrying his cross towards Calvary. The worsening of his illness prompts him to see a doctor in Lily. The doctor is an atheist who injects himself with morphine to cope with his life and terminal illness. He has a bleak outlook on life and has a personality that the priest finds unpleasant. The doctor then reveals to the priest that he has stomach cancer, and the priest feels defeated and he's scared to die. From the beginning of the novel, a friend of the priest from the seminary wrote him a letter requesting his company. His name is Dufresne and has since left the priesthood and lives with a woman. Since Dufresne lives in Lily, the priest finds it a great time to visit. The woman he lives with has an intimate conversation with the priest that is another highlight of the novel. She's a poor hospital orderly who has had a rough life. Despite her boorish and uneducated disposition, she retains a jolly and steadfast outlook on life. Although she is irreligious, she respects the promise that Dufresne once made to be single for life, and refuses to formally marry him on that principle. The priest described her as being guarded by angels for her inviolable character. Perhaps we all know hard-working women like her, who have been dealt terrible cards yet still march forward with a strong attitude. The priest envies people like her. He stays overnight, where he has an intense bout of his cancer. Clutching onto his rosary, he asks Dufresne for a final blessing. Although Dufresne hasn't practiced in years, he assents to his friend's wishes and grants him absolution. The priest passes away, with his last words being, "Does it matter? Grace is everywhere." We can only imagine that he has ascended into heaven. By my praises, Diary of a Country Priest is not without faults. The translation is awkward and really clumsy at times. I had to reread a lot of passages, especially when it dealt with heavy topics. Perhaps it could be owed to the stream of consciousness nature of the diary, but I feel compelled to blame the translation. Another problem I found was the pacing. I think the first 50 pages are really slow and a little confusing the first time around. I think the second reread is very helpful, but I'd have a hard time recommending this to the average person. I think I think this book is good for people who are into introspection and slow burning novels. Other than that, I still think it's a great book and I would definitely reread it again in the future.